Have you ever been in a room where you felt like you didn't belong? A room so steeped in the quiet, suffocating weight of old money and inherited prestige that you could feel your own. Ordinary background like a cheap wine stain on a priceless silk tablecloth. For the past 2 years, since I had fallen in love with Alistair Ashworth, that room had been my life. If you've ever felt like you weren't good enough for your partner's family, if you've ever had to smile through a dinner party while being politely dissected like a creature under a microscope, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. My name is Nora, and I am an orphan. That's not a tragic backstory meant to elicit sympathy. It's just a fact. My mother died when I was a toddler, and I never knew my father. I was raised by my grandmother, a fiercely loving woman who worked as a seamstress and raised me in a small, third-floor walk-up apartment that was filled with love, books, and the constant hum of her sewing machine. She gave me everything she had, but what she couldn't give me was a name, a lineage, a bloodline that would be acceptable to the Ashworths. The Ashworths were not just a family, they were a dynasty. They had come over on a slightly later, less famous boat than the Mayflower, but they spoke of it with the same reverence. Their family tree was a towering, ancient oak, with every branch documented, every marriage a strategic alliance. They were the kind of people who had a summer cottage in Newport and a family crest on their sterling silver. And I, Nora, the girl with no last name that mattered, was in love with their son and heir, Alistair. Alistair was nothing like his family. He was kind and funny, and he had a gentle soul that seemed completely at odds with the rigid, formal world he had been raised in. We met in a dusty, used bookstore where I was working part-time while getting my master's degree in library science. He didn't ask me who my family was. He asked me what I was reading. We fell in love between the stacks of forgotten novels, in a world far removed from the suffocating pressure of his heritage. For the first year, our love story was a secret, beautiful bubble, but eventually, the time came for me to meet the family the day he proposed. With a simple, beautiful diamond ring he had bought with his own modest salary from his job as an architecture professor, was the happiest day of my life. The day he took me to meet his mother, Beatrice, was the beginning of the end. Beatrice Ashworth was not a woman. She was an institution. She was elegant, intelligent, and possessed a polite, smiling cruelty that was more terrifying than any open hostility. She didn't approve of me. That much was clear from the moment I walked into the grand, imposing entrance hall of their family estate. She looked me up and down, her eyes taking in my simple dress, my lack of heirloom jewelry, my entire, unacceptable existence. Her campaign against me was a death by 1,000 paper cuts. It was a masterclass in passive aggression. "Nora, darling, what a lovely dress," she would say, her voice as smooth as cream. "Is that a local designer? How charming," the subtext was always clear. "It's not one of ours." She would ask me pointed, probing questions about my past, her voice full of a false, anthropological curiosity. "And your mother, you said she was a nurse. How admirable. It must be so grounding to come from such a practical background." She made my life sound like a quaint, rustic hobby. The worst of it always revolved around the Ashworths' oldest and most bitter rivalry, the one with the Donovan family. The feud was the stuff of local legend, a generations-long war that had started over a land dispute in the 19th century and had festered into a deep, abiding hatred. The Ashworths were old, established money. The Donovans, led by their patriarch, the brash, self-made billionaire Liam Donovan, were new money. And in my fiancé's family's eyes, that was the ugliest kind of money of all. Liam Donovan had built a global shipping empire from nothing. He was richer, more powerful, and more influential than the Ashworths had been in 50 years, and they despised him for it. They saw him as a vulgar brute, a testament to the decline of good taste and proper breeding. Any mention of his name at their dinner table was met with sneers and derision. I saw Liam Donovan as funding the new wing of the art museum. My future father-in-law, Henry, grumbled one night at dinner. Tacky. Just throwing his money around to buy respectability. You can't buy a good name, no matter how many buildings you put your gaudy name on. It's all for show, Beatrice agreed, taking a delicate sip of her wine. That kind of man has no sense of history, of legacy. It's all about a name, but never about the bloodline. And then she would turn her cool, assessing gaze on me. Bloodline is so important, don't you think? Nora, it tells the true story of who a person is. My fiancé, my sweet, gentle Alistair, would squirm in his seat. He hated it when she did this. He would try, in his own weak, ineffectual way, to defend me. Mother, please, he would murmur. Nora's family is not the topic of conversation. Nonsense, darling, she would reply with a bright, dismissive smile. I'm just getting to know my future daughter-in-law. It's important to know where one comes from. The worst of it came during a weekend visit to the estate. Beatrice had invited some of her oldest, most pedigreed friends over for a formal luncheon. I spent the entire morning in a state of high anxiety, trying to choose an outfit that would be deemed acceptable. At the lunch, Beatrice was in her element. She moved around the table, a gracious, smiling hostess, all the while landing her little verbal darts with surgical precision. When she introduced me to her friends, she would say, "And this is Alistair's lovely fiancée, Nora. She's an orphan. You know, a complete blank slate. Really, it's so brave of her. She made my life sound like a tragedy from which her son was rescuing me. She'd ask me questions she knew I couldn't answer. Nora, your father's family, were they from the north or the south of England? The Millers have so many branches. You know, I would have to just smile and say, I'm afraid I don't know. And she would give her friends a small pitying look that said, see nothing. I felt like an exhibit at a zoo. Here we have the commoner, species unknown. Note her simple dress and her lack of ancestral anecdotes. Fascinating. Later that evening, Alistair found me crying quietly in the guest room. I'm so sorry, Nora, he said, his face a mask of misery. That's just how she is. She doesn't mean to be cruel. Doesn't she? I asked, my voice thick with tears. It feels very intentional to me. Alistair, it feels like she's trying to break me, to make me feel so small and so worthless that I'll just disappear. She'll come around, he insisted, pulling me into a hug, I promise. Once we're married, once you are officially an Ashworth, she will have to accept you, she'll see. You just have to be patient. I let myself believe him. I clung to that promise like a drowning woman clings to a piece of driftwood. I loved him. And I believed that our love would be enough to conquer his mother's snobbery. I believed that once my name was Ashworth, her questions about my bloodline would finally cease. I was so naive. I didn't realize that for Beatrice. The wedding wasn't the finish line. It was just the final hurdle she had to prevent me from crossing, and she was about to demand the ultimate proof of my worthiness. A proof she was certain I did not possess. For the next few months, I lived in a state of suspended disbelief, clinging to Alistair's promise like a prayer. Once we're married, she'll come around. I repeated it to myself like a mantra. The wedding became my finish line. The moment my life as Nora, the unworthy fiancée, would end, and my life as Nora Ashworth, a woman who finally undeniably belonged, would begin. But Beatrice Ashworth was not a woman who waited for a wedding to assert her dominance. She used the wedding planning itself as her new battlefield. Every detail became a fresh opportunity to remind me of my place. The guest list was the first skirmish. I had a small list of my own, a few close friends from college. My former boss from the library who had been a mentor to me, my small found family. It was a list of about 20 people. Beatrice had looked it over with a thin, tight smile. This is lovely, dear, she'd said, but we have so many family obligations. The Vanderbilts, the DuPonts, Alistair's third cousins from Boston. Our list is already over 300. We'll certainly do our best to accommodate your friends. Perhaps at a smaller, more intimate brunch later on. She was politely, ruthlessly, erasing my entire social history to make room for hers. Then came the dress. I had dreamed of wearing something simple, modern, elegant, but Beatrice had other ideas. She graciously offered me the use of the Ashworth family wedding gown, a dress that had been worn by 5 generations of Ashworth brides. It was a museum piece, an intimidating concoction of yellowed lace and a 16-foot train. When I tried it on, it was 2 sizes too big and smelled of mothballs, and the weight of a history I was not a part of. It's a perfect fit, Beatrice had declared. ignoring the way the fabric hung off my shoulders. "We won't change a stitch. It's tradition. Alistair, my sweet, weak Alistair, just stood by through it all. A pained look on his face. "It's just a dress, Nora," he'd whispered to me later. "It's just a guest list. Let's not start a war over it. The only thing that matters is you and me." But it did matter. It mattered that every choice, every detail, was another reminder that I was not an equal partner in this union. I was a foreign entity being absorbed into the Ashworth empire, and I was expected to shed my own identity at the door. The final, unforgivable escalation came on a Tuesday night in October. Beatrice had summoned us to the estate for a formal family dinner, just us, her and Alistair's father. Henry. The mood was tense, formal. I knew this wasn't just a social call. This was an ambush. We sat in their grand, silent dining room after the soup course was cleared. Beatrice placed her napkin delicately on the table and folded her hands. She looked at me with an expression of grave, serious concern. It was her most dangerous look. "Nora, dear," she began, her voice as smooth as polished silver. "As you know, the Ashworth family name is one of the oldest and most respected in this country. It is a legacy we have a sacred duty to protect." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "We are all so thrilled that you will soon be a part of that legacy. But a legacy is only as strong as its foundation, and a foundation must be built on truth, on knowledge, on knowing, without a shadow of a doubt, who we are and where we come from." I felt a cold knot of dread begin to form in the pit of my stomach. I knew where this was going. "Your own personal history," she continued, her voice dripping with a false sympathy, "is, through no fault of your own, a mystery, a blank page. You are a wonderful girl, of course, but you are unknown. Your bloodline is unknown." She said the word bloodline with an almost religious reverence. "In my great-grandfather's day," she went on, a nostalgic, faraway look in her eyes, "he once broke off a very promising engagement because it was discovered the young woman's grandfather had been a baker, a common baker. It was a scandal, but he did it to protect the family name." She smiled at me, a sharp, glittering thing. "Of course, we are much more modern now. We don't concern ourselves with such things as a baker in the family tree." The implication was clear, but we still concern ourselves with something. "However," she said, her tone becoming brisk and businesslike, "in this modern age, we have modern tools to ensure clarity, to ensure that there are no unfortunate surprises down the road, no lingering questions, no scandals waiting to be unearthed." She reached beside her and produced a thick, glossy brochure. Sliding it across the polished mahogany table toward me, on the front, in elegant gold lettering, it read, "The Sterling Archives, a premier genealogical and DNA analysis service. This is a wonderful, very exclusive firm," Beatrice explained. "They do a full genealogical workup, tracing your family tree back for centuries. And they do a comprehensive DNA analysis, for health, of course, and for purity of lineage." I stared at the brochure, my vision blurring. I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't a suggestion. This was a command, a test. I was a horse whose teeth were being checked, whose pedigree was being inspected. "Before the final sale, before you officially join this family," she said, her voice now hard, the velvet glove finally off, "before you take the Ashworth name, we insist that you take this test. It is a simple formality, a way to finalize the family tree, and to welcome you into our family, completely, without any unanswered questions." The ultimatum hung in the silent, cavernous room. No test, no wedding. I looked at Alistair. I pleaded with him with my eyes. "Say something, defend me. Tell your mother she is being a monstrous, classist snob." He just sat there, his face pale, his eyes fixed on his plate. He wouldn't look at me. His father, Henry, just nodded in solemn agreement. "Your mother is right, Nora. It's a sensible precaution, a formality." I felt the last of my hopeful illusions shatter. I wasn't marrying a man. I was marrying a family that saw me as a potential contamination, a risk to be managed, and the man I loved was going to stand by and let them treat me like a specimen in a petri dish. I don't remember how the rest of the dinner ended. I don't remember how we got home. The next thing I knew, I was standing in the living room of our apartment, and all the pain and humiliation and rage I had been swallowing for 2 years came pouring out of me. How could you? I screamed at Alistair, my voice hoarse with tears. How could you just sit there and let her do that to me? A DNA test, like I'm a dog you're checking for papers. She wants to test my bloodline. What century is this? Nora, please, just calm down, he said, his voice a pathetic, pleading whine. It's not a big deal. It's just a stupid test. It's just something she needs to feel in control. It is a big deal to me, I cried. It is a statement that I am not good enough, that your love for me is not enough, that I have to prove my very blood is worthy of your family. And you just sat there and let her. You chose her over me. I didn't choose her, he insisted, his own face a mask of misery. I'm trying to manage her. Don't you see this is the last hurdle? Nora, I swear it. If you just do this one thing for her, for me, she will have no more ammunition against you. She will finally accept you. We can get married. We can be happy. Please, he begged, taking my hands. Please, Nora, just do it. Let her have her stupid piece of paper, and then it will be over. For us. I looked at him, at his handsome, pleading face, and I saw him for what he was, a weak man, trapped in a cage of his own, a cage of duty and fear, and he was asking me to step into it with him. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion. I was so tired of fighting. I was so tired of being the problem, and I loved him. God help me, I still loved him, and I wanted the life we had dreamed of. I pulled my hands away. Fine, I whispered, the word tasting like defeat. Fine. Alistair, I'll do it. I'll take the test. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He thought he had won. He thought he had successfully managed the situation. He had no idea he had just agreed to a test whose results would burn his entire world to the ground. My agreement to take the test was a surrender, and Beatrice Ashworth, a masterful general, accepted my unconditional surrender with a gracious, triumphant smile. Excellent, dear, she'd said, her voice smooth and victorious. I'm so glad you've decided to be sensible about this. I'll have my assistant make the appointment for you at the Sterling Archives for this Friday. I'll accompany you, of course, to offer my support. Her support. I knew what that meant. She wasn't coming to hold my hand. She was coming as a warden, a supervisor, to ensure the specimen was properly collected and the chain of custody was not broken. The days leading up to Friday were a quiet, surreal torture. Alistair, my fiancé, was a man transformed by relief. He was attentive and loving and cheerful, completely oblivious to the profound, soul-deep humiliation I was feeling. He acted as if the problem was solved. See, he said to me one night, hugging me in our kitchen, this is good, we're getting it over with. It's the last hurdle. Nora, I swear it. Once she has her silly piece of paper, she'll have nothing left to complain about. She will finally welcome you into the family. Then we can be happy. He didn't understand that the price of this happiness was my own dignity. He didn't see that in asking me to do this. He had already sided with his mother against me. He just wanted the conflict to be over, and he was willing to sacrifice my self-respect on the altar of his family's peace. I loved him, but a new, cold distance was beginning to form in my heart. I was starting to see the weakness that my grandmother had warned me about. Friday arrived, a gray, overcast day that perfectly matched my mood. Beatrice picked me up in her chauffeured black Mercedes. Alistair, conveniently, had an important faculty meeting he couldn't miss. I was to face this humiliation alone with my tormentor. The Sterling Archives was not a simple lab. It was located in a discreet, imposing limestone building in the wealthiest part of the city. The interior was all hushed tones, antique furniture, and the quiet, intimidating air of old money. It felt less like a medical facility and more like a private bank where the currency was bloodlines instead of dollars. A woman in a crisp lab coat led us back to a private, sterile room. Beatrice sat in a leather armchair, her posture perfect, her handbag clutched in her lap, and she watched my every move with the intensity of a hawk. She was here to witness the vetting of the new family asset. The technician was professional but cold. She took my blood. She swabbed my cheek. The entire process was clinical, silent, and deeply, profoundly dehumanizing. I wasn't a person in that room. I was a collection of genetic material to be analyzed, judged, and ultimately approved or rejected. I felt like a prized head of cattle being inspected before an auction. Have you ever been made to feel that your entire worth as a person comes down to something you have no control over? Your background, your family, your blood. That's where I was. I wasn't Nora anymore. I was just a pending result, a vial of blood in a centrifuge. When it was over, Beatrice patted my arm as we walked out. "There now," she said, her voice full of a bright, false cheer. That wasn't so bad. Was it? The results should be ready in 4 to 6 weeks, just in time to finalize the wedding invitations. It will be such a relief to have this all tidied up. The 6 weeks that followed were the longest of my life. The waiting was a slow, grinding torture that eroded my sense of self. Day by day, Beatrice was in her element. She was smugly, confidently certain of the outcome. She was sure the test would reveal a long, unremarkable line of Eastern European peasants, or Irish farmers, or something equally common, something that would prove her point, that I was not one of them. She would drop little comments at the few family events I could not escape. "We're so looking forward to learning more about your heritage, Nora," she'd say in front of her friends. "It's so important to know one's roots, even if they are very humble." Alistair tried to be supportive, but his comfort was as hollow as his promises. He would tell me not to worry, that he loved me no matter what the test said. But I knew that wasn't true. If the test came back in a way that his mother deemed unacceptable, I knew, deep in my heart, that he was not strong enough to choose me over her. He would be sad, he would be heartbroken, but he would, ultimately, let me go. I started to internalize their narrative. I would look at myself in the mirror and see not just me, Nora, but a woman with a blank page for a past, a woman with a questionable bloodline. I began to feel ashamed of my own mystery, of the humble working-class world my grandmother had raised me in. Beatrice's poison was seeping into my own bloodstream, more potent than any DNA test. I found myself retreating into the past, into the one piece of my heritage that I knew was real. I had a small cedar box where I kept the few things my grandmother had left me. Faded photographs of my mother, a beautiful young woman with my eyes and a sad, gentle smile, a few of her letters, which were sweet and unremarkable, and my grandmother's own journals. I spent my nights reading them, poring over her beautiful, looping script. She wrote of her struggles as a seamstress, of her deep love for my mother, and of her own quiet, dignified pride. She never wrote about my father. He was a ghost, a question mark, a story she had taken to her grave. But reading her words, I felt a flicker of her strength. She was a woman who had faced hardship with grace and resilience. She had never been ashamed of her humble roots. She had built her life on a foundation of love and hard work, not on a family name. She was not pathetic, and neither was I. A new feeling began to take root in the barren soil of my shame. It was anger, a quiet, slow-burning anger. Anger at Beatrice, for her cruelty, anger at Alistair, for his weakness, and anger at myself, for ever agreeing to this disgusting, humiliating farce. Who were they to judge me? Who were they to demand proof of my worthiness? My worth was not in my blood. It was in my character. It was in my heart. The heart that my grandmother, a woman with more integrity in her little finger than the entire Ashworth clan possessed, had so carefully nurtured. The day the email arrived, I was ready. The subject line was simple, clinical. "Your Sterling Archives genetic report is available for viewing." My heart started to pound, but it was not just with fear anymore. It was with a new, defiant resolve. I didn't care what the test said. I didn't care if my ancestors were kings or cobblers. My worth was not determined by a lab report. Alistair was home. He saw the email pop up on my laptop screen. "It's here," he breathed, his face a mixture of excitement and terror. "This is it, the end of the line. Open it." "No," I said, my voice calm. He looked at me, confused. "What? I'm not going to open it with you, Alistair, I said. This test, it was never for me. It was for you and for your mother. You are the ones who needed proof, so you can be the ones to see it first. But I need you to know something. Whatever it says, it doesn't change who I am, but it will change everything about who we are. I stood up and walked into the other room, leaving him alone with the laptop and the link to my entire genetic history. I closed the door. The results of the test didn't matter. The fact that the test was taken at all. That was the only result that had any meaning, and it was an answer I wasn't sure our love could survive. I sat in the guest room, my designated holding cell, and listened to the sound of Alistair's nervous pacing in the living room. The silence from the laptop was a living entity, a monster growing in the other room. My entire future was being decided by a loading bar and a series of genetic markers. I had never felt so powerless. I was waiting for my own fiancé to come and deliver the verdict on my worthiness. I was waiting for him to tell me if I had passed or failed the test of his family's approval. The pacing stopped. The silence in the apartment became absolute. Heavy, I held my breath. A minute passed, then another, finally. The doorknob to the guest room turned slowly, as if the person on the other side was terrified of what they would find. Alistair stood in the doorway, and the expression on his face was not one of relief. It was not one of simple, gentle disappointment. It was a look of pure, pale, speechless horror. He looked at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. "Nora," he whispered, his voice a hoarse, strangled sound. "Oh my God, you have to look at this." "What is it?" I asked, my own heart starting to pound with a new, different kind of fear. "What did it say? Is it bad?" "Bad," he let out a short, hysterical laugh. "Oh, it's so much worse than bad. It's a catastrophe." He couldn't seem to look me in the eye. He just gestured weakly toward the living room. "Page 7. Just look at page 7. I walked past him, my legs feeling unsteady. I felt a dizzying sense of dread. What could be so bad? What skeleton had been hiding in my anonymous bloodline that could possibly provoke this reaction? Was I descended from criminals, from charlatans? I sat down at the laptop. My own hands were shaking now. I navigated to the website, my fingers fumbling on the trackpad. I clicked through the introductory pages, my eyes scanning past the glossy graphics and corporate speak. I found the main results page. The first thing I saw was the ancestry chart, a colorful pie chart that broke down my genetic heritage. It was, as Beatrice had so smugly predicted, unremarkable. 50% British Isles, a mix of Irish and English, 25% Scandinavian, 25% a vague mix of Eastern European. I felt a small, sharp pang of disappointment. So she was right. I was a nobody, a girl with common, humble roots. I took a deep breath and clicked on the next tab, the one that read DNA Relatives. The page loaded, and a large, red notification box flashed at the top of the screen. Urgent immediate family match found. A DNA sample in our database shows a 99.9% probability of a direct parent-child relationship. My heart stopped. An immediate family match. A parent? It was impossible. My mother was dead. And my father was a ghost. A man no one ever spoke of. How could he possibly be in this database? A database used by the wealthy elite to trace their pedigreed family trees. My eyes scanned down the page, past the incomprehensible charts of genetic markers, until I found it. The section detailing the match. Match type father, and underneath it, the name that shattered my entire universe into a million pieces. Match Liam Donovan. I stared at the screen. The name meant nothing and everything all at once. Donovan. Why was that name so familiar? And then, like a punch to the gut, the memory of a dozen bitter dinner table conversations crashed down on me. Liam Donovan, the brash, new money billionaire, the man who had built a global shipping empire from nothing, the Ashworth's oldest, most hated, most bitter family enemy. I stared at the screen, at the name Donovan next to the word father. It was the punchline to the cruelest, most cosmic joke in the entire world. My first thought was that it was a mistake, a lab error, a glitch in the system. It was impossible. But the report was thorough. It included a small, publicly sourced bio to confirm the match's identity. Liam Donovan, founder and CEO, Donovan Global Logistics, born Dublin, Ireland. There was even a small, low-resolution photo of him from a business magazine. A man with a stern face and eyes that looked shockingly, unnervingly, like mine. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind, a tornado of confusion and disbelief, and then, slowly, pieces of my own forgotten history began to swirl in the storm. My mother, her fierce, stubborn privacy about my father, my grandmother, her seamstress hands always busy, her loving but firm refusal to ever speak of him. He was not a good man. Nora, that is all you need to know. I remembered a faded photograph I'd once found at the bottom of her sewing box. A picture of my mother, much younger, laughing, working as a waitress in a high-end diner. I remembered asking my grandmother about it. "Oh, that was a long time ago," she had said, a sad, distant look in her eyes. "Before you were born." She worked for a little while at a private lunch club downtown, near the financial district, near the Donovan Global Logistics headquarters. It all started to click into place with a horrifying, sickening clarity. My mother, the young, beautiful waitress, Liam Donovan, the powerful, married billionaire who was known for his ruthless business tactics and, as the old society pages whispered, his philandering, a secret affair, a secret child, a mother who was too proud to ask for anything, who chose to raise her daughter alone in a small apartment, supported by her own mother's hard work. My fiancé's family had sent me on a quest to find my origins, hoping to find dirt, to prove I was a nobody. Instead, I had struck oil. I had discovered I was the secret, illegitimate daughter of their greatest enemy, a man 100 times richer and more powerful than they could ever dream of being. They had been looking for a baker in my family tree. They had found a king. A strange, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. I looked over at Alistair, who was now pacing the room, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was not looking at me with joy, or even with shock anymore. He was looking at me with pure, unadulterated terror. "A Donovan," he was muttering, running his hands through his perfect hair, messing it up for the first time I'd ever seen. "A Donovan. Oh my God, Nora! Do you have any idea what this means? My mother. She will literally go insane. She will have an aneurysm on the spot. This is a disaster. This is so much worse than you being a nobody. You're the enemy." And in that moment, as I listened to his panicked, selfish rambling, as I watched him worry not about me, not about my entire life being a lie, but about what his mother would think, the last, lingering vestiges of my love for him died. It withered and turned to ash. My grandmother was right. He wasn't just weak. He was a coward. He was an Ashworth, through and through, and I was a Donovan. The shock, the confusion, the grief for a life I never knew, it all began to recede, replaced by a new, unfamiliar feeling. It was a feeling of cold, hard, and deeply dangerous power. I was no longer Nora Miller, the orphan librarian with the questionable bloodline. I was Eleonora Donovan, the secret daughter of a king. And the Ashworths, in their arrogant, snobbish quest to humiliate me, had just handed me a crown and a sword. Alistair was still pacing, on the phone now, no doubt with his mother, his voice a high-pitched whine of panic. I calmly stood up. I went to the printer and printed out a single, beautiful, life-altering page from the DNA report. Page 7. The paternity match. I folded it neatly and tucked it into my purse. Alistair hung up the phone. She is demanding we come to the estate immediately. For a family meeting. He looked at me, his eyes full of a new, fearful deference. "Nora, what are we going to do?" I looked at the man I had once loved, the man who was now a stranger to me, a terrified little boy worried about what his mommy would say. I gave him a slow, cold smile, a smile that did not belong to the quiet, gentle Nora he thought he knew. It was a smile that belonged to a Donovan. "We aren't going to do anything, Alistair," I said. "I am going to a family meeting, and I'm going to introduce them to the new me." The drive to the Ashworth estate was a study in contrast. Alistair drove his gleaming silver Jaguar, but his hands were gripping the leather-wrapped steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. He was a nervous wreck, his face pale and drawn, a constant stream of anxious chatter filling the car. What are we going to tell them? We can't show them that page. Nora? We just can't. Mother will have a heart attack. A literal heart attack. Maybe we can say the results were inconclusive, or that we should get a second opinion. I, on the other hand, was perfectly calm. I sat in the passenger seat, looking out at the passing scenery, my heart a slow, steady, and purposeful drumbeat in my chest. The fear I had lived with for 2 years was gone, replaced by a strange, exhilarating sense of clarity. The power dynamic had shifted. I was no longer the one who was afraid. The truth is the truth, Alistair, I said quietly, not looking at him. Your mother was the one who demanded it. Now she has to live with it. We pulled up the long gravel driveway to the grand stone manor. The house that had once intimidated me with its old money arrogance now just looked old. A relic from a bygone era, desperately clinging to a sense of superiority that was about to be rendered obsolete by a single sheet of paper in my purse. They were all waiting for us in the formal drawing room. It was arranged like a tribunal. My future father-in-law, Henry, stood by the massive stone fireplace, a stern look on his face. Alistair's younger sister, a carbon copy of her mother named Cynthia, was perched on the edge of a chaise lounge, her expression one of bored anticipation. And in the center of the room, seated in a high-backed, throne-like armchair, was the Queen herself, Beatrice Ashworth. She was the picture of elegant, formidable power. Dressed in a silk blouse the color of cold cream, her face was composed, her posture perfect. She was a woman who was about to deliver a final, decisive judgment, and she was savoring the moment. Alistair and I walked in. He immediately went to his mother's side, a nervous, apologetic son. I stood alone in the center of the room, feeling not like a defendant, but like a prosecutor who was about to present her closing argument. Well, Beatrice began, her voice as smooth and as cold as marble. You're here. I trust the last 6 weeks have been illuminating for you, Nora. A time for reflection. You could say that, I replied, my voice even. She gave a small, thin smile. Good. Before we proceed with the results, I want to be perfectly clear about why we are here. The Ashworth name is not just a name. It is a legacy. It is 200 years of good breeding, of careful alliances, of protecting our line from unfortunate influences. Her eyes, 2 chips of blue ice, were fixed on me. She was giving her grand speech, her justification for the cruelty she was about to inflict. I let her talk. I wanted to hear it all. I wanted to remember every single, condescending word. Marriage, for us, is not a flight of fancy. Nora, she continued, it is a merger. It is the sacred duty of each generation to strengthen the family, to ensure the purity of our heritage. Alistair, my son, has a good heart, a soft heart, and sometimes that softness can lead to, shall we say, sentimental choices. She was calling me her son's mistake, right to my face. Alistair just stood beside her, his head bowed, his silence a familiar, painful betrayal. This test, she said, her voice turning brisk, was a simple, modern precaution, a way to bring clarity, a way to finalize our family tree and ensure that there are no skeletons hiding in any closets. It is a necessary final step before we can welcome you formally into this family. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Alistair's father. We are all in agreement that the results of this test will determine how we proceed with the wedding plans. The threat was clear. The judgment was at hand. She held out a perfectly manicured hand, her expression one of supreme, smug confidence. So, Nora, she said, her voice dropping, as if delivering the final, killing blow. The time has come. You have the results. Please, share them with the family. This was it. The moment she had been waiting for. The moment she would be proven right. The moment she could finally, graciously, dismiss the little orphan girl with the unknown bloodline. I did not move for a long moment. I let the tension in the room build. I looked at their faces, at Beatrice's smug certainty, at Henry's stern disapproval, at Cynthia's bored superiority, at my own fiancé's pathetic, terrified misery. Then, slowly, I reached into my purse. I did not pull out the thick, multi-page report. I pulled out the single, neatly folded piece of paper, page 7. I walked across the vast, silent room. I did not hand it to her. I leaned forward and placed the single sheet of paper on the polished antique table in front of her. Face up. You wanted to know about my bloodline. Beatrice, I said, my voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. Here it is. She looked down at the paper, a triumphant smile on her lips. Her smile froze. I watched her face. It was the most satisfying moment of my entire life. I watched as her eyes scanned the top of the page. I watched as her brain processed the words. Parent-child relationship, 99.99% probability. I watched as her triumphant, condescending expression began to crack, to crumble. And then, I watched as her eyes hit the name of the paternal match, the name of their oldest, most hated family enemy, Liam Donovan. A small, strangled sound escaped her lips. The color drained from her face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. Her perfectly manicured hand, the one that had been held out in triumph, began to shake uncontrollably. The formidable, untouchable matriarch of the Ashworth family looked, for the first time in her life, utterly and completely defeated. What is it? Beatrice, her husband, Henry, asked, annoyed by her sudden silence. He leaned over her shoulder to look at the paper. His own reaction was more explosive. What is this garbage? He roared, snatching the paper from the table. Donovan, this is a lie, a trick. He shoved the paper into his sister-in-law Cynthia's hands, who looked at it, her own face turning white with shock. The name, the single, hated name, was being whispered around the room like a contagion. Donovan, a Donovan. They were all staring at me now, their faces a chaotic mess of horror, disbelief, and sputtering rage. They looked like a coven of vampires who had just realized they had invited the sun to dinner. And Alistair, my fiancé, he just sank into a chair, put his head in his hands, and made a small, wounded sound, like a dying animal. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the floor, at the ruins of his own carefully managed, peaceful life. His first thought wasn't for me, for the monumental, life-shattering truth I had just discovered about myself. It was for himself, for the inconvenience, for the trouble this would cause with his mother. It was the final confirmation. He was an Ashworth, and I was a Donovan. I stood there in the center of the room, a pillar of calm in the storm of their creation. The silence was beautiful. The silence was the sound of their arrogance and their snobbery imploding. The silence was my victory. Beatrice finally found her voice. It was a high-pitched, hysterical shriek, all her elegant composure gone. This is a lie, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. A forgery? A trick you are trying to destroy this family. I just looked at her, at this small, hateful woman, and I felt nothing but a cold, distant pity. I walked over to the table and picked up my purse. I looked at the pathetic, broken man sitting with his head in his hands, the man I had once loved, the man I was supposed to marry. Alistair, I said, my voice calm and clear, I believe this engagement is over. Then I turned, and without another look at the horrified, sputtering faces of the Ashworth family, I walked out of that drawing room. I walked through the grand, silent foyer. I walked out the massive front door, into the sunlight. They had demanded to know my bloodline, and the truth of it had just set their entire world on fire. And I, Nora Donovan, was just walking away, without even stopping to watch it burn. I walked out of the Ashworth estate and into the sunlight of my new life. The 29 years I had spent as Nora Miller, the quiet orphan, had ended in that drawing room. The woman who got into her car and drove away was someone else entirely. She was Eleanor Donovan, and she had no idea what to do next. The drive back to my apartment was a blur. My mind was a chaotic storm of emotions. Grief for the grandmother who had loved me so fiercely and the mother I had never known. Rage at the aunt and uncle who had raised me on a foundation of lies, and a strange, terrifying, an exhilarating curiosity about the man whose blood was currently singing in my veins. Liam Donovan, the billionaire, the titan, the enemy, my father. When I got back to my apartment, I saw that I had 17 missed calls from Alistair and a string of frantic text messages. Nora, please, we need to talk. Don't do anything rash. My mother was just upset. This doesn't have to change anything between us. Nora, please answer me. I love you. His words, which once would have been a balm to my soul, were now just pathetic, empty noise. This doesn't have to change anything. It changed everything. He didn't get it. He never would. I ignored his texts. I turned off my phone. I was done with the Ashworths and their weak, suffocating world. I had a much bigger, more terrifying mystery to solve. For a week, I did nothing. I called in sick to my job at the museum. I sat in my small apartment with the single sheet of paper from the DNA report, and I just thought. I looked at the name, Liam Donovan, and I tried to reconcile the two images in my head: the ruthless, brash billionaire I'd read about in the papers, and the man who had, however briefly, loved my quiet, gentle mother. What did I want from him? His money? No. The Ashworths had taught me the poison of a life built around money. His name, maybe. It felt more real than the one I had been given. What I wanted, I realized with a sudden, sharp clarity, was answers. I wanted to know the story, my story. I decided to make contact, but how I couldn't just call the front desk at his massive corporation, so I did what I did best. I went to the library, my library. I used my librarian skills, my deep knowledge of research databases and public records. It took me 2 days, but I found it. A private email address for his personal office, an address used for highly sensitive and private correspondence. I sat at my laptop, my heart pounding, and I composed the most important email of my life. The subject line was simple: personal matter, DNA match, Eleonora Miller. The email itself was short and direct. Dear Mr. Donovan, my name is Eleonora Miller. A recent comprehensive genealogical test has revealed a 99.99% paternal match between us. A copy of the relevant report page is attached. I was raised by my maternal grandmother and was told my father's identity was unknown. My mother, who passed away in her early 20s, was also named Eleonora. I do not know if this information is a surprise to you, or if this is an error in the system, but I would be grateful for a moment of your time to gain some clarity. I am not seeking anything from you. I am only seeking the truth. Sincerely, Nora. I attached the single, life-altering PDF of page 7 and, with a hand that was surprisingly steady, I hit send. I expected to wait for weeks, if I ever heard back at all. He replied in under an hour, or rather, his assistant did. The email was brief and formal. Mr. Donovan has received your correspondence. He would like to meet with you in person. A private suite has been reserved at the Fairmont Hotel for tomorrow at noon. A car will be sent to your address at 11:30. The next day, I stood in front of my closet, trying to decide what a person wears to meet the billionaire secret father she never knew she had. I settled on a simple, dark blue dress. I wanted to look like myself, whoever that was. The meeting was in a sprawling suite on the top floor of the hotel. With a panoramic view of the city, he was already there, standing by the window, looking out. He was older than in his magazine photos. His dark hair shot through with silver, but his presence was just as intimidating. He radiated a raw, restless energy, a sense of power that seemed to suck the air out of the room. He turned as I entered, his eyes, a startlingly bright blue, the same color as mine, swept over me, analytical and sharp. He was assessing me. Miss Miller, he said, his voice a low rumble with a faint, lingering trace of an Irish accent. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. I sat on the sofa. He remained standing, a king in his temporary castle. I will be direct, he said, his eyes never leaving my face. I have had my own people vet the lab that performed this test. They are legitimate. I have also had them look into you. I know where you work. I know where you were raised. And I know about your recent, unfortunate engagement to Alistair Ashworth. A dark, humorless smile touched his lips. It seems you have a talent for finding yourself in the middle of my enemies. It would seem so, I said quietly. Your mother, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. Eleonora? Was she a waitress? For a time, I said, my heart starting to pound again. At a private lunch club downtown, 29 years ago. He nodded slowly, a faraway look in his eyes. And in that moment, his hard, billionaire's facade seemed to crack, and I saw a flicker of a different man, a younger man. I remember her, he whispered, more to himself than to me. She had a laugh that could fill a room. She was real, in a world full of fakes. He finally looked at me again, and his eyes were full of a new, raw emotion. She never told me. She just disappeared. I sent people to look for her, but she was gone. She had my grandmother, I said. They didn't need you. They didn't need your money. No, he agreed, a look of profound, ancient regret on his face. She was too proud for that. He walked over and finally sat in the armchair opposite me. He looked at me, really looked at me, at my eyes, my face. You have her smile, but you have my eyes. He leaned forward, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. They raised you, Robert and Susan Sterling. My old rivals. He had clearly done his research on the Ashworths too. No, this is not a story I am familiar with. The Ashworths, I corrected gently. My fiancé's family. The people who raised me were my aunt and uncle on my mother's side. He nodded. Processing. The people who demanded the test. The Ashworths. It's always about blood with them. Isn't it? He let out a dark chuckle. Well, they got what they asked for. The conversation that followed was not one of a father and a daughter. It was one of two strangers trying to piece together a shared, broken history. I told him about my grandmother, the seamstress. He told me about his own impoverished childhood in Dublin. He was not a warm man, but he was an honest one, and in his eyes, I saw not the love of a father, but the fierce, proprietary interest of a man who has just discovered a long-lost, priceless asset. I was his daughter, I was his blood, and he was, in his own way, claiming me. The Ashworths, he said, his voice turning to steel as our meeting came to an end. They tried to humiliate you, to declare you a nobody. They have no idea what they have just unleashed. He looked at me, a predatory smile on his face. My legal team is at your disposal. We will bury them. And in that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. I could accept his offer. I could become a weapon in his ancient war with the Ashworths, funded by his billions. Or I could be my own person. Thank you, I said. And I stood up, feeling a new, unshakable confidence that was entirely my own. But this is my fight. I don't need your lawyers. I just needed my story. I ended my engagement with Alistair over a single, brief phone call. He pleaded, he begged. He said his mother had been wrong, but it was too late. The man I was going to marry would have defended me. Alistair, I told him, you are not that man. And I am a Donovan. And a Donovan does not marry an Ashworth. I hung up. The final chapter of my story is still being written. I am getting to know my father. Our relationship is strange and new and complicated, but it is real. He is teaching me about his world. I am teaching him about mine. And the Ashworths. Their worst nightmare has come true. The unworthy orphan they tried to cast out is now the acknowledged daughter of their greatest rival. An enemy is at their gates, an enemy of their own making. My fiancé's family demanded to know my bloodline. They were so obsessed with my past. They completely destroyed their own future. Never be ashamed of where you come from. You never know what kind of power is running through your veins, just waiting to be discovered.